Hello out there. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You might be wondering, what is this random ice cream cone that's making me hungry? Well, we're going to talk about twists. So I thought twist. Um, getting a little clever here. But yes, plot twists. We are just plot twists. How to do them, why to do them, how to do them well, how to do them poorly, what to avoid, all of that. And I have a special guest. It's a little bit of a twist. We're just going to bring it up front, though. And that is Catherine. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
Good. Hey,
Hello.
Daniel. Hey, everybody.
And we have not practiced any of
I
these
love the
slides. So
sweet twist.
Catherine really has no idea what I'm going to be talking about, so she's along for the ride as well. So this is going to be lots of fun. But yeah, she's done a lot of writing herself, so I'm sure she's going to have things to add along the way. I see people are joining us from all over. We have New Mexico, Hawaii, Arizona, Washington, Chicago. Fantastic. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. And while we're talking, please feel free to comment, ask questions. If you have any tips that you utilize yourself for writing twists and things like that, just let us know. All right, so tips are coming fast and furious. One thing I want to talk about. I'm going to adjust this a little bit so you can see it better. The difference between a plot twist and a plot development. Okay. So things can happen in your plot, but every time something happens in your plot, it's not like, what a twist, right? Sometimes things just happen and it's almost obvious. For example, you could tell a story about somebody going to the grocery store and then they get to the counter and or the checkout and they have to dig out their wallet. Well, that's not really a twist. That's just a plot development. What would be a twist would be, and their wallet wasn't there because that was an unexpected development. You set up a situation in which case the expected outcome is not what occurred, right? So when we're talking about plot twists, I'm specifically talking about an unexpected story development, or maybe the audience can clue into it, but it's something that carries major consequences to the characters that they didn't see coming. That also works as well. But I'm not talking about just kind of the obvious, well, because of this, therefore this. That's not really a plot twist. That's really more of just a development. All right, so that being said, usually the plot twist, if it's done well, is a bit of a hinge point, right? It's one of those things that if that twist didn't exist, well, what comes after it would be dramatically different. And so that's a way you can tell the difference between a plot twist and a plot development. It also can help you determine whether or not the plot twist is something that is a good idea or if you're just kind of grasping at straws trying to create some sort of excitement for yourself, right? Because if after that hinge point of the plot twist, it's like more or less things are going the same, it's kind of a weak plot twist, right? Because what if it's like they get to the grocery store checkout and they don't have their wallet. So they pull out their phone and they pay. And then it turns out their wallet was in the car the whole time. Well, I mean, like, who really cares, right? Like, what was all that about? And sometimes people will bring up things and it's like, da da da, and you're like, wow, what are they gonna do with this? And then it's like nothing happened. None of the characters don't really care about it. Nothing really changes. Catherine, you maybe have come across this, maybe more in your editing work, or maybe even when you're writing, that you just kind of come up with something. Have you ever, excuse me, had this happen where it's like a plot twist is just a sake for a twist and it doesn't really do anything? I think she
Oh, yeah.
froze. Okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
And I think sometimes they're used. Ah, sorry. Yeah, I think sometimes the attempt is misdirection when that happens. But you have to be careful that your plot doesn't take the place of a red herring.
Yes. And we're going to talk about the use of red herrings a little bit later. So that's a little bit of foreshadowing, which we talked about last week. Now, one way to write a plot twist, let's say you're like, you know what? I just struggle at this because I write plots and I'm really good at making logical flows and I'm not really good at surprising the audience, right? And that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. One way that you can brainstorm a plot twist is just to consider all of the assumptions, right? Consider every possible thing that the audience is assuming up to this point, and then decide that one of those assumptions is dead wrong. So, for example, it's like, all this time you thought they were in a fantasy world. It turns out, nope, they're in a theme park. All this time you thought that this was just a car. Actually, no, it's an alien from outer space. Sometimes things that are assumptions because there's no reason for us to question it, that's a good way to make a really cool plot twist. Object that doesn't seem very important becomes super important just because we didn't assume anything about it, right? A person's uh, um, uh, moral stance, a person's uh, allegiance. That's what I'm trying to get. A person's allegiance can just be assumed. You're like, well, they seem like they're along for the ride in a good way, and no, they're actually a traitor the whole time. Somebody said, all this time you thought a person was alive but was dead, right? The Sixth Sense, a famous plot twist, right, works on that because we just assume that the person is alive. And I know you're like, spoiler, it came out in 1999. Now, I am going to try to avoid giving too many examples of actual plot twists for that reason. So, even though I generally like to bring up a lot of examples, I'm not going to bring up as many specific ones in this live stream. So, just realize that's why, because you never know. But I will be speaking of it conceptually. All right, so consider all the assumptions. Let's get into some actual twists that are common. An unexpected death is one of the most common. Uh, this can be really effective, right? Because what you can do is you can raise the stakes in a way the audience does not anticipate. This is another example I'll give is the movie Psycho, right? The movie Psycho really shocked audiences with the first murder because it was the most famous person in the movie. Scream, the original Scream, did the same thing for the same concept, right? The person that you did not expect to be the person that would die, and that raised the tension of the rest of the movie, right? You can do the same thing in a book by having a character die that the audience does not anticipate because it is not the kind of character you expect to die. Have you ever done this specific one or seen this done well, Catherine, or ever like, played around with it?
Oh, goodness. There's so many examples of this that are done well that it's hard to think of one that wouldn't be super spoilery.
But one thing I will say is that the way you can do this badly is if it's actually an expected death and you think it's unexpected because you're like, well, they're never going to see that coming. For example, the guardian character, or I often call the relationship character, a lot of people expect that character to die because that's a
Oh,
character that's
yeah.
really helping the main character level up. So they're the Gandalf, they're the Obi-Wan. So you kind of expect at some point they're going to get removed from the story, so the main character has to stand up on their own. So when they die, it's like, yeah, okay. It's not really a plot twist for you. Now, I would say that it's still, you could still consider a plot twist just because mechanically what happens to the characters afterwards makes a big difference. But, it's not one of those shocking, whoa, that hit me in the gut. Somebody said George R. R.
Yeah,
Martin. Yeah,
sort of
George
like
R. R. Martin
Neo in The
is
Matrix.
is infamous for it. Yeah. Right, exactly. George R. R. Martin is infamous for his unexpected deaths where they almost seem at random, and it really makes you feel like at any given moment anybody could die. Yes, red shirts in Star Trek is a good example of this not done well if you actually want to surprise somebody, right? There's a bunch of people and a random person I've never met before, and they're about to face a horrible monster. Yeah, killing off that other person's not really going to be a plot twist. That's really going to be just raising tension, right? It's not the same thing as an actual plot twist. And you'll notice the characters don't really dramatically shift the way they're thinking before and after a red shirt or a cannon fodder character dies, right? Maybe they're a little bit more scared of the antagonist, but that's about it. Somebody said they just assume that everybody in George R. R. Martin's books are going to die. It's kind of like a Shakespeare tragedy, right? You just expect everyone's going to die at the end, right? Uh, unknown motivations. We talked about this before. This is a really common plot twist. Somebody you thought was a good guy is a bad guy. Somebody you thought is a bad guy is a good guy. Somebody you thought was telling the truth is dishonest, etc., etc. This works really well because you can really pull the rug out from underneath people in many different ways. Because you can have maybe some clues along the way that might have lead, and when they look back, they're like, "Oh yeah, that was kind of sketch. I just didn't really think about it." The other thing though is you can have somebody just be a really super good liar, and they would never have known in a million years. Sometimes plot twists like that, audiences can feel a little bit cheated because they couldn't really play along with it, but it can be done. It's not inevitable that it's not necessary that you have to know that you have to clue people into an unknown motivation. You can have an unknown motivation come from basically nowhere, as long as nothing they did up to that point would go against that motivation in a way that makes sense. Then that's really where it gets to cheating, right? Um, Catherine, unknown motivations. I'm sure you've written this because how can you avoid this? Do you have any way that you like to implement this in your writing?
That's right. Yeah, no, I think this is one of the most fun plot twists to me is just getting the you think that somebody's on the one side and it's not necessarily a betrayal, it's just nobody thought to ask.
Right. Exactly. No, it could be something like that. It can be nobody thought to ask. It could be like I said, it can be one of those things where the person's just really good at being like a double agent. And there's nothing wrong, like I said, with the audience not being able to have figured it out. The problem is if you can go back and there's something that doesn't make sense. But if you can go back and you'd be like, well, all this time I thought all the reasons they were doing this was this reason, but actually it makes sense they could be doing it for a completely different reason, then it would be okay. Yeah, Catherine's lagging a little bit, but that's okay. I'll just ask a question and then talk a little bit longer and let her cut me off. Well, there's also a character is not what they appear, who they appear to be, which is a little bit different than a motivation. What I mean by this is something like a character you think is just a lowly pauper and it turns out that they're actually the king in disguise, or they're actually an alien, or they actually have magical powers, or things like this. This can even be the main character, right? The unexpected family heritage is a little bit of a cliche at this point, uh, but it can be work out really well. The classic example of this, of course, is Darth Vader from Star Wars, where the character was not who they appeared to be because you thought of them as just this mechanized monster, and it turns out that they had a direct link to the main character, and it very much adjusts the way that you analyze the entire situation, that entire conflict. It's really one of the best plot twists in history that people speak about because it just raises the stakes and it changes the entire way you frame the story, um, in a way that you wouldn't really have seen coming. And there were a couple of dropped hits to it, but for the most part it really wasn't something the audience was expected to have figured out. It was something that was just kind of thrown at you, right? The Wizard of Oz, yeah, uh that's another great representation of that. These two tie together, especially if the bad guy is not the bad guy. Yes. That can be really great. One of the best ways that a plot twist can work out is if it not only causes some sort of shift in terms of the way you understand the information of the world, but if it changes the way you think about the world, right? There's actually a moral shift or a philosophical shift. That's
Mm.
where you can get that really punch in the gut plot twist rather than just, yeah, that's kind of cute, right? All right, let's move on. Something is under the radar. We talked about this. The object, right? The object that doesn't really matter, the person that doesn't really matter, turns out to be really super important. This is a really fun one. Oh, that's a good question. When is the best time to reveal the real character? So, when do you actually implement a plot twist? Let's say that you're going to do a plot twist and you want the audience to understand who the character is. And you're gonna hate this answer, but it really is going to depend on your story.
Yep.
For example, you can think of The Princess Diaries, right? And basically the hook of that book is, "Oh, by the way, you're actually a princess," and that happens very early on in the story. Versus Darth Vader, that doesn't happen until the second episode of the trilogy. So it's about midway. It's basically the big midpoint of the whole thing, because it shifts the entire landscape. So it kind of depends. I would say generally for a big earth shattering twist, it generally will happen, as is kind of obvious, like right at the beginning as a hook. It'll happen kind of like almost directly in the middle because it shifts the entire landscape, or it happens right at the end as a big shocker. And between all three, I would say the shocker is probably the hardest to do right. Because think of it this way: when you get to the end of a book and you have a shock ending, what you're essentially telling the audience is that they were being lied to the entire time. And so that whole time, and there's two reasons why this can be bad. One is maybe they actually liked the lie and now they're mad because the truth is really annoying, right? The other problem is, well, actually, maybe they like the truth a lot more, but they had to get through the lie, which was kind of bland. And so, therefore, you delayed what would be a really interesting story by just having a twist. So, that even though we all love those kind of third act shocker twists like the Twilight Zone or Shyamalan has a few of them, they could be really fun. They are very difficult to write for that reason. I don't even know, Catherine. Have you ever written like something quite like that shockery at the end? It's hard. I've never done it.
The closest was like the second to last chapter in one of my books. And I
Okay.
did do a shock, but I tried to give that extra chapter to like round it out and explain why.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I think there's lots of books that attempt it, and then there's mixed feelings from the readers. Some readers love it, and some readers are going to hate it. Sort of like watching Frozen, and there's a certain character in there that people are split
Yes.
on. They're like, well, I wish I'd known that earlier because I liked this character. But then you get
Mhm.
further down, and it's like, oh, well, that just undoes this.
Yeah, no, it's true. Frozen's actually a good example because that's getting whoops, sorry. That's getting to I'm just gonna keep playing around with my shots. Okay. That gets around to yes, Hans. We might as well say it. Everyone's seen Frozen. Come on. You've probably seen it 30 times if you have children. The thing about Hans is that I don't think that lands very well because there are some actions he does up to that point that don't really make a whole lot of sense if you think about him as not having the best interest at heart. And about the only clue in you had to the audience is when he says, well, he has a bunch of brothers in line for the throne and he kind of gets neglected. Other than that, there's really nothing to clue you in except thematically that you can kind of figure it out, especially if you've pegged that Anna is the protagonist and Elsa's the antagonist, right? But yeah, that one isn't yes, Hans needed a bit more foreshadowing. I don't even like I said, I do think that was a problem. I think the bigger problem is in the scene where like the chandelier falls and everything. They're like gonna shoot Elsa and he's like, "Don't do it." It's like, why would he care? Like I don't quite understand his motivation there because he ultimately wants to kill Elsa anyway. So it doesn't
Yeah,
quite land. It makes him seem too, it's like a cheat to the audience. But again, that comes down
yeah,
to the fact that you are lying to the audience until that twist. And so you have to be very careful when you implement it because, yeah, it's like a practical joke, right? It can go the wrong way. You can either be like, "Oh, that's awesome! I was fooled," or you can be like, "Really, really?" So you gotta be careful. Okay, moving on to the next one. Uh Brainstorm tons of twists and then use none of them and use another one, right? This is how you can get an interesting twist is think about all the different things that you can do and then just keep going and then just keep going and then just keep going and then eventually you might come up with something that truly is rather unexpected. Now, I don't mean to just come up with something so outlandish doesn't make sense, right? But often our first 3 or 4 ideas are kind of the obvious. So you kind of
Yeah.
want to go deeper. Brainstorming, Catherine. What are some things that you like to do for brainstorming?
I like to write random scenes from the villain's point of view.
Ooh, that's a
Um,
cool idea.
and then, of course, not actually use them, but it just teaches me a lot about the characters and opens up what's going on in the plot that maybe I wouldn't think about.
Yes. Yeah, like switching up the point of view is actually a really great idea. I would that's brilliant. I've never really thought of it doing it like that. But what I often tell people when they're writing a scene, is to think of who is in the most pain, right? And really try to emphasize that. But it's kind of like you need to do the twists, you need to think of what would cause the most pain, and you just keep going, and you go, and you go, and you go, and you might end up finding something that you maybe were too nice to wanna do to your characters, but probably you should do to your characters. Somebody's saying, "Daniel telling us to explore your inner sadist." Unfortunately, as an author, you kind of have no choice. They say that act 1 is getting your main character up a tree, and your second act is throwing rocks at them. So make sure they're good rocks. And unexpected rocks are more fun. Lightning hits the tree, right? Uh, just
Just
make
make
it
it a
bad.
cannonball. Take it out.
Just make just go for it. Go for gusts. Love it. All right. Something else to keep in mind is try writing the worst possible twist. Like, don't think of logic, don't think of reason. Just be like, if I was the worst writer in the whole world, what would happen here? And you're like, why would I want to do that? Well, what it will tell you is kind of what you can't undo, right? What is going to break the story, but what it also might do is just really free up your brain to modify that. Because what you might
Mhm.
find is that the worst possible twist is actually very close to the best possible twist um if you just didn't betray your audience in the way that writing the worst possible twist does. And sometimes it could just really force you to think outside of that box that you put yourself into. Also, it can be completely unrelated, but just the act of doing it, the act of writing badly on purpose, can just be like, but if I did this, it'd be great. And then you just switch to it. It's really weird because I've done that before. Just writing a line, it's like a line of dialogue, and I get to a point, I'm like, I don't know what they would say. And I'm like, what's the dumbest thing they could say? And I write that. Like, wait, wait, wait. Actually, they should say that. I don't know. It's like reverse psychology on yourself. Have you ever done this?
Yes, and I tend to go for like cliches a lot too,
Mhm.
so that way I make sure that I avoid them because it's like get it out of your system. So, oh, and the twist is I'm your relative and now I'm going to die. Okay, so now I know what I'm not going to do in this scene.
Right, exactly, and then you might be like, "Okay, but that being said," and sometimes it just frees up your brain. Sometimes too, it's just writing out, like, you just gotta get the writing out, and it's just spitting out. It's almost like you have to remove the bad ideas because somehow they're floating in your head or something, and
You
it
got to
just
get
helps.
your Doctor Strange ideas out, Daniel.
I'm not writing poorly. I'm writing poorly on purpose. Exactly, right? Exactly. That's the right attitude to have. Act two, setting the tree on fire. See, there's another one. Throw rocks, lightning hits the tree sets on fire. Whatever it is, snake in the tree. Exactly. See, they're good. They're good. Keep coming up with different things. Um, I do love who is in the most pain. Isn't it always the author? Wow. I hope not always. I hope not. Hopefully it's not your editor. That's all I have to say. Sometimes I'm not so sure. Is it possible to do an effective plot twist in a short story? Yes, absolutely. In fact, I will say if you're doing the whole third act shockaroo, short stories are a great place to practice that. And the reason why is that, yes, you've been lying to the audience, but you've only been lying to them for a few minutes, right? The amount of time it took them to read that short story. And that's a very big difference than lying to them for hours upon hours upon hours, right? The emotional investment
Yeah.
is not the same. And if it's one of those really fun twists that it's like, oh, I got to read the whole thing again, well, you'll just go back and you'll do that. And I've done that with plenty of short stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some of my favorite short stories have a really snappy twist like that. The other thing too is it allows you, like, you look at the Twilight Zone, right? Some of the twists in the Twilight Zone, if it was a full length work, would be a little bit like, okay, that's kind of cute, but really, but for a short piece, it could be fun. It could be a little bit silly sometimes. Like the twist in To Serve Man is just fun and kind of silly. But if that was like a full length book, you'd be like, really, this whole thing hinges on that, and it just wouldn't land the same way. So yeah, I actually think that short stories is a great place to do that whole twist. Let's see. Can a bad twist be so corny that it's funny and worth keeping? Um, I mean, here's the thing. I never want to just say blanket no on everything, right? So then the question is what do you mean by bad, right? Because if it's corny and if it's funny, then maybe it's not really bad. It's more like cliche and expected. So what
Mm-hmm.
I would say in that situation is what you're getting at is you have a couple of options. You can either hang a lantern on it, as it's called, and you can say, all right, everybody, isn't that really obvious? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge in a certain way. And that's done a lot. It's not my favorite thing to do. Or what you can do is you can pile a twist on the twist. So you start out with it being kind of corny and funny, and then there's actually a tweak to it, and so it's not quite what you expected, right? So,
Yeah.
keeping to Catherine's idea, it's like, oh, you secretly found out that you have a long lost relative from the castle, and then the relative shows up, and it turns out, oh wait, he's actually the janitor of the castle. And, and you play on that trope, right?
Yes.
And you can decide how long it is between those two announcements, right? Maybe for a short period of time, the character is believing a certain way, right? And then the audience is like, really? You're going to go with that contrived thing? And then actually, you're a little bit ahead of them. So, yeah, that can happen. A good example of this is Ratatouille, actually, in my opinion, because Ratatouille, they started out with the twist that Linguini is the son of Gusto, yeah. And you just know where this is going. You're like, oh, that's so obvious. There's the whole story is gonna be like they can't get the contract, and it's gonna be the 11th hour, and then they'll finally get it together, and then like the next scene, it's solved, and you're like, well, wait a minute, what happened to the rest of the movie, right? Like, like almost immediately the head chef gets kicked out and it's like, well, I thought he was the antagonist. Like, what? Like, and it's a lot of fun. So that's a great way to do that sort of thing. If you have a kind of corny, funny twist or cliche twist, keep it and then twist on the twist. So, and I'm sure Catherine has done that because she loves inverting tropes. So, inverting tropes. Catherine, how do you invert a trope?
Oh goodness. Well, I'm going to actually bow to one of the classics because I was reading Princess Bride again the other
Oh, there you
day.
go. Yeah.
The moment when Inigo Montoya says, "But I am not left-handed," and then you're like, gasp. But then you've got Wesley who says, "Well, I'm not left-handed either." And it's just like double twist of the exact
Yeah.
same twist. But I think it depends a lot on the tone you want your book to have too. Because if you're
Uh-huh.
trying to pass off a purposefully bad trope, and that might lead your book to have more of a lighter air or comedic air.
Mhm.
And so if you're writing a super dark fantasy, then that might not strike the same way.
Right. The only reason that I could see it working the other way is if it's to keep the audience on edge, right? So you have kind of the obvious cliche twist, and then you twist that in a sinister way that the audience is really not expecting. And then that can work really well. The alien bursting first in the crew member's abdomen, that is a very good twist. Uh, yeah. then that's one of those pivot points, right? That's like the whole thing changes after that point because you have an idea of what's going on, and then it's like, all bets are off for sure.
Yeah, no thanks to AVP for ending with that twist.
Not a fan, I guess. Uh, can you have the audience believe the twist and then twist it back? Yeah, you can do that. Sometimes you can end up with a plot that's so twisty, though, it does kind of turn into a pretzel. You've got to be careful. I have seen things like that. And there's something to be said about not having a twist at all, right? That uh, a lot of times, something like a romance doesn't really necessarily have like a major twist because people are reading that more for comfort. And so they kind of want to have a certain grounding and things not to be too shifty and things like that. But maybe mild twists, but nothing on some sort of whoa level. Like you don't always have to do that. You don't always have to surprise your audience like that. It's kind of like cooking, right? You don't always have to be like, "Well, I bet you weren't expecting this ingredient," or "You thought it looked like, like the food that looks like something and it's something else." Like you don't always want to do that. Sometimes they
Yeah,
just want a well prepared steak, and it's fine. Double twists are risky. They're very unforgiving to write, and if you're not on point, it feels clumsy. The audience will hate it. It is true. It's true. I hate it when the story turns out to be a dream or a coma. See, that's that third act pow twist done badly because everything was a lie. You thought this all mattered. This was in a real place, and it's just in somebody's head. Yeah, I hate that twist because it
but there are
almost
a
makes
few
me
that
feel
do
like
it
I'm.
well, like Wizard of Oz.
Oh, I hated the Wizard of Oz twist when I was a kid. I think I'm like the only person. So this is full disclosure, Daniel Kaplan. No, I don't hate the whole work, but when I was a kid, I was mad. I was like, "What? That didn't really happen? I'm so confused. Like, am I supposed to think they actually went?" Like, I was so mad. Guessable twists could be super annoying. Okay, this is something you also need to be careful of. You think that you've buried this really exciting twist, and the audience has figured it out like on page one, and they're just waiting for you to tell them what they figured out. And until you do, you're being so coy about it. Oh, that can drive you bananas. like, I'm sure Catherine could speak to this, like from an editor standpoint. She's probably come across this perhaps, but I've even in published works, like even in mainstream works, I've come across this where it just makes me angry because you're just waiting for them to do this twist, and you're like, I get it, I know it, and to some degree, I'm less picky about it than I think others would be because I'm really good at guessing twists. So I'm like, whatever. That's just me. That's not their fault. I'm just weird. But sometimes I'm like, okay, anybody should have got this. You're not that clever. Just do it and move forward because I'm sick of you being coy about it. It's driving me crazy.
Yeah, I think this happens a lot when people plan maybe too much, and you have to account for the natural flow of the story once you start writing. So it's great to know what your twists are, like somebody said in the chat, from the beginning, especially if you're obviously a planner. But sometimes that timing needs to change so that it's
Right.
realistic.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing is sometimes this is that when we going back to what we just talked about, you didn't really brainstorm enough. You brainstormed and you came up with, well, what would be a really shocking thing that would happen, or a shocking world building element, right? And the audience is way ahead of you because they would have thought the same thing because that was your first initial gut, right? Um, about the world. It's like, well, the world is, for example, it's like, well, actually, all of this is really a simulation. And it's like, yeah, the audience is ahead of you because, like, this is the typical scenario for what is really normally a simulation, things like that. I love that we're having an argument about Lost. Yes, Lost is a really great example of just twist after twist after twist, twisting into a pretzel for some people. Hence, the I really hated to Lost. But we also have people that say they loved Lost. And what you'll generally find, in my opinion, when you analyze this, is that it depends on what you care about in your stories. The people that really care about characters are okay with Lost for the most part. and the people that are more worried about plot don't like Lost. It tends to be the way it is. The people that are okay with more of an abstraction of a story where it's like I'll get what I get out of it and I just like exploring are more okay with Lost. People that want a story to be very tight and put together and all neatly constructed don't like it. So it's really what your audience wants. I know people who love it, even with the ending and everything, and I know people who thought it was a huge waste of time and they want their money back. It just depends. So, but it does show you have to be careful because that show did funnel both of those audiences, right? So that, in a sense, is a bit of a failure because it shouldn't have done that. It should have found the right audience from the beginning so it could lead them through and give them a satisfying conclusion, at least on average. Because I would say, at least on average, it was a bit dodgy because it was quite a divisive ending. If the reader knows it, is it really a twist? No, that's the problem, right? But it thinks it's a twist, and you know the author thinks it's a twist. But it's annoying on so many ways because the author is lying to you badly. It's like a bad liar. It's like the kid with their mouth full, and they're like, "Who ate the cookies?" Whoa, no. Like it's just annoying, right? Like just tell me, like spit it out.
Yeah, there's a great question from Witsy about that too that ties into that. Um,
Oh,
where's
wait,
the
wait, wait. Can you
line?
scroll up? Hold on. Where is the line between twist versus something reader knows that the main character just hasn't figured out? Yeah, no, I understand. Um, I would say, generally speaking, when people say talk about big twists, they are talking about something that the audience doesn't know. However,
Mm-hmm.
mechanically, you could say that something that we know that the main character hasn't figured out, essentially, at the point at which they figure it out, that is a twist in the story. So
Right.
it's a little bit of a definitional thing. Um, but where's the line? The line is either you know or you don't, obviously. And when
Mm-hmm.
you do know, that's a good way of fixing the problem of lying to the audience, right? Maybe the main character has to be lied to. That doesn't mean the audience had to be lied to. You can ask the question, in Frozen, could the movie have landed better for people if they would have known about Hans from the beginning? I can't answer that question. That's a rather subjective question, but you might think it might be better if we would have known from the beginning.
Well, it's like the Lion King. Like we all knew that
That's-
Scar had
yes. Oh
taken
yeah,
out
right,
Mufasa,
right. Yeah, no,
so we
very
were sort
true.
of in on the secret.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, imagine the almost all of that drama would be lost if we thought that it was just kind of a tragic accident and Simba was blaming himself too much. That just wouldn't have the same weight as if we know it was actually really a plot and murder, and he's just making him feel bad about himself. And yeah, no, it would be quite different for sure. Da, 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 da. Somebody said they had sudden flashbacks to time my dog eat an entire stick of peanut butter then you had. Yeah, that's what you don't want. You don't want that kind of bad lie. All right, completely random plot twists can feel forced. Why? Because they are forced. Do not be like, I've got to have an unexpected element to my story, and so therefore something crazy happens. No, because that's a betrayal of what you've set up to this point. It can be, uh, it can really hurt you because the audience was along for the ride and they were invested, and then you just decided that something completely unrelated to anything is just going to come in here, and that's not what they signed up for. It often, like I said, betrays what came before it because if it's completely random, it means it doesn't really have anything to do with your world building. The character is acting super out of character or something like that. And so it's just a big lie leading up to something that doesn't even make any sense, and it'll just fall flat. So do not force it. If you're the kind of person that writes in a straightforward way, that's okay. Like, we've talked about brainstorming perhaps to clear that up. But if you just never come up with anything, we'll just make a really good steak. It's okay. You don't have to like be super creative about it. That's your creativity can be in the way that you pull it off. It doesn't have to be in having something the audience doesn't expect. That is okay. Um, Certainly you can all think of stories that were quote unquote predictable that you really liked. I mean, sports movies are often super predictable. We pretty much know what's going to happen, and we like watching them because they're motivational, right? And we follow the journey. Um, and I'm not obviously there's going to be certain unpredictable things about it, right? You're not going to know every little detail, every little beat. I'm talking about anything that's like a major whoa. You don't have to have that moment. It's okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes you want to get rid of it. I've gotten rid of it. Have you ever gotten rid of one? I've gotten rid of one before because I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that was fun, but really, I don't think it's going to land.
Yeah.
So I got to
Yeah.
stay.
Goodbye, darling.
Goodbye, darling. Right? Yes. Um, how about having a few minor plot twists in the story than the big reveal at the end? Yeah, you can have your twists kind of build on themselves, but it kind of again that's getting back to almost being a double twist, and that can start to become a knot really quick. So you gotta be careful. A big reveal at the end, like I said, the biggest problem with it is that you've been lying to the audience the whole time, which means they haven't seen the more interesting thing. Because hopefully the reality is more interesting, which means you maybe cost yourself the more interesting reality the whole time. Plus, they can feel betrayed for you lying the whole time. And there's a possibility they don't like reality as much as the lie. And then you really have a problem. Like me not liking The Wizard of Oz being a dream, because I much would prefer it to be a real place. Sometimes twists are no more than context. Okay. This can be fun, right? An example of this would be um something like Ender's Game. Ender's Game, the big twist of that is basically context. And for those of
Yep.
you who haven't read it, it's an older book, but it really hits you hard. But really, it doesn't actually change very much that happened. It's just the context of which it happened is quite different than what you were thinking. And so it lands really well. And that's a way to do one of those big twists without it being quite so risky. Because nothing was really a lie exactly. It's just you didn't have enough information to really know. Murder mysteries are often basically this. Often there are clues given that we just don't have the correct context for. So it's not like anybody was actually lying to us per se, or we didn't have the information. We just didn't understand what the purpose of the information was.
Yep.
But this can be done on a smaller level as well. For example, somebody's the way that somebody can talk to somebody, they can say something. Prophecies are done like this sometimes, and the context of the prophecy makes all the difference. Words have multiple meanings, things like that. All right, moving on. Hide plot twist with misdirection. This is a way to keep people off your trail. Catherine's all getting excited. The danger with this is kind of the same thing as the big twist at the end, right? That's basically the biggest version of this is the whole work is a misdirection, and at the end you're like, well, actually. But the danger of this is always that the misdirection is better than what you were doing, or by misdirecting you were missing out on the whole thing while it was happening, and you kind of deprive the audience of all that fun. So you've got to be careful with it. However, it can be very helpful. Misdirection, Catherine, have you ever done it?
I have. I love it. If you can't tell my hee.
Yeah, right.
Um, but I
You're
definitely
stupid.
second what you said, Daniel, for sure, about making sure that people don't get so lost in your continual misdirection that you lose some of your readers. And that would be bad. Like, if only readers who are 100% dialed in can pick up the tiny details to make it to the end and be like, aha, like Shutter Island does a great job of that, then you end up having readers go, this story didn't make any sense because the twist in the end is like, well, I thought this story was about insert topic here. And it actually
Hmm.
turns out that it was about something else this whole time, and they just walk away feeling confused, disconnected. So you want your main plot to not get lost in your your
Yeah,
misdirection, just the twist,
right.
not the actual plot.
Yeah, and the other thing too, you don't want to get lost are things like character or I mean, unless if the character is the misdirection, that's one thing. But you don't want a character acting out of character just to have misdirection, right? That was like the whole Hans thing we were talking about. The other thing is you don't want to violate your genre or the audience expectation with the misdirection, right? So, like for example, if you're reading a sci-fi story and then it turns out that halfway through it, you're like, well, actually, all of this is taking place inside a crystal ball at this magician's house. You're like, well, wait a minute, that's not what I signed up for at all. Like, this is very strange. And that can happen. That can happen where there's a tonal shift because in the misdirection, you thought this was kind of a heartwarming story. It turns out to be a very dark story, or you thought it was a dark story and it turns out to be kind of this trite sentimental story or whatever. Like, you don't want to do that, right? You don't want it to completely break what you've set up, because you're ultimately not going to please anybody when you do that. It's just violating too many things. Now there are examples of things where I feel like this is done well because you can totally clue into the fact that you're being misdirected, and you're like, okay, I know this is not what's really going on, but I don't know what's really going on, but I know this is not what's really going on. And that can work actually. That actually can work well. It's not quite the same as guessing the twist because you haven't guessed what the twist is. You just guess that there is one. And so then what that means is you're just playing detective work, right? And some
Mm-hmm.
genres thrive on this. Obviously, mystery. Everybody goes into that genre or a mystery plot knowing there's going to be clues that are misdirection because that's what it
Mm-hmm.
relies upon, right? Um, on the other
Yep.
hand, though, even genres where it's not as obvious, if there is something like a mystery plot that gets thrown in there, like they're like, I wonder what that person is up to. A lot of people are going to assume that misdirection might be involved, and so and that doesn't mean you don't do it because you're like, well, I don't want to put in the misdirection because people are going to see right through it. Yeah, they'll see right through it, but the point is that it still could obfuscate what is the twist, right? Even if they can see that it's misdirection, it can still
Mm-hmm.
work. That's my point. I hope
Yeah.
that made sense.
Character is key. Character is
Character
key.
is
But
key. Yeah, keep your characters consistent, and that could mean that they're doing things the whole time that have multiple interpretations, right? Or it could mean they're doing certain things and they're doing other things behind the scenes. But what you don't want is for them to do things that don't make sense. And all of a sudden it's like, actually, I'm evil and nothing I did up to this point made any sense. Yeah, that's bad. Or the opposite. All of a sudden I'm a goody two shoes. It's like, well, what, what? One way to hide plot twists, this is one thing we talked about with foreshadowing, is to have anything that builds up to your plot twist do multiple things, or your plot twist do multiple things. It'll feel more embedded into the story. Ultimately, a plot twist should do multiple things. It should change the character who's affected by the plot twist in a major way, so it shouldn't just be an aha moment for the audience. It should be an aha moment for somebody in the story. Otherwise, it's like if a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, it happened, right? It's like, well, did that twist even take place? Like what? And then the other thing is that it should probably adjust the stakes of the story. It often does that, and it often adjusts the theme of the story a little bit. If you can do all three of those things, you've got a really solid twist. Because for example, let's say your theme is like something like community or something, right? If the twist is, well, somebody that they thought was really an ally turns out to be somebody that betrays them, well, that's going to change how you view community. The community has now abused the character, right? And so that's affecting how you view. You could start out the book, community is awesome, and then it's like, well, community's mixed, and that kind of twist would really land. It's gonna impact the audience a lot more. All right, next one is kind of getting to that. An impactful plot twist is both a change of information, a change of attitude, and a change in theme. This is something to keep in mind. You want to have it to be multi-layered if you want it to be that pow plot twist. Now, not every plot twist is like this because not every plot twist is like this earth-shattering event. But if you want an earth-shattering event, if that's what you're going for, make sure you're doing all three of these things and make sure the audience is aware of it, right? Don't be so subtle about it that the audience doesn't catch on. So it needs to be something that we didn't assume about the story is true. The characters change the way they feel about life, because of this, and it changes the theme of the story as well. This is just something to keep in mind. I'm just going to keep reiterating it. It's a good point.
Yes.
Good plot twists also involve philosophical paradox often. The person that you always thought was nice is really evil. The person that you thought was alive is really dead. Something like that. Again, what you're doing is you're inverting the audience expectation, right? And so that is something that makes it land, and that's what makes it a twist. It's a complete inversion to what you were anticipating up to that point. You thought the Planet of the Apes was something it was not, um, and it changes the entire thing. Actually, Planet of the Apes, going back to what I was saying before, that's a really great context one, right? Because everything up to that point is not a lie. It's all very straightforward. However, how it affects you is changed a lot by the context of the situation, right? And
Yeah.
so you don't feel that betrayed because you were still enjoying the riveting story throughout, but it just gives it that sucker punch of weight at the end when you find out the true context of the
Mm-hmm.
situation.
Yes.
It's kind of like the difference between just completely throwing everything on the ear and just raising the stakes, because really that's all it kind of does. It just kind of raises the stakes. My roll-up stories are roller coaster rides in the dark. No idea where you're going, but keep all hands and feet inside until the end. I love that. And I think that's great. Some audiences love that kind of stuff. If you're looking at that and you're like, well, I can never do that. That's okay. Don't write for that audience, right? Not everybody loves a roller coaster. Some people like a ferry boat ride. It's okay. As long as the scenery is pretty. Beta readers are your friends. We talk about this a lot, but with plot twists specifically, because often you'll have a beta reader and they'll get through the book and they're like, oh, I loved it until dot dot dot, because that plot twist did
Mm-hmm.
not work for them, which either means you need to kill it or you set it up better. Has this ever happened to you, Catherine, where a beta reader has thrown you a curveball with a plot twist and you're like, uh-oh?
Yes. I'm gonna say that I end up, because I'm a pantser, I think it might be worse, but I'm like, oh, I have this really creative twist, and then the beta reader comes back and they're like, yeah, no, this doesn't work. And then you chop off your entire ending and you rewrite the whole thing. But no, seriously, if you can get a good beta reader and somebody who will tell you when they find out the twist, like, oh, suspicion while reading, they are actually such and such, that tells you when it happens in your story, and it tells you how predictable your story is, and then that can avoid what Daniel was talking about earlier, which is you think you're stringing the readers along, but you're not. So yeah, invaluable.
Right. Yeah, because you can have both problems, right? You can have, I mean, what you want is, I didn't see that coming, and wow, that was so cool you went there, right? That's what you want. But what you don't want is, yeah, that was so obvious, and it just felt like it was a slog getting to that point because I had figured it out and I was just waiting for you to tell me. Or I was so mad because it was going so well, and then you did this, and you ruined the character, you ruined the world building or something. Yeah, you don't want that. And sometimes that can happen. Now, you do have to be careful because a beta reader could tell you, I'm so mad at you for killing that person. They were so good. But isn't that kind of what you might have wanted, right? Didn't you kind of want the audience to be
Mm-hmm.
upset? So you have to be careful between whether or not it's just the audience, you're not telling the story the audience wanted you to tell versus you're not telling the story you want to tell well. Those are two different things.
Yes, a good beta reader can tell you exactly why or why not for the reasons they're giving, and that helps you know which one is their opinion and which one is the objective feedback.
And we're getting some great questions. All right. What exactly is a beta reader? A beta reader is somebody who's reading your book prior to it being published or even maybe sent off to an editor or an agent. It comes from the computer world with beta testing for a computer program. The idea is that it's somebody who can give you feedback, who's a representation of your audience, right? Probably better than, I mean, not better as a person, but a better reader than your audience in terms of being able to speak to potentially what's wrong with your book. That's what you're looking for, right? What ultimately what you want is somebody that can express themselves well in terms of their reaction. That's really it. Everything else doesn't matter, you know. But what matters is that they can express themselves well because of the reaction. Because if they can express themselves well, and you can realize, oh, they're just not my audience, you can figure that out if they're expressing themselves well, you know. If they're not very good at expressing themselves, they could be totally in the pocket of your audience, and it's just not going to be very helpful. So the Swiss should not be predictable in any way. Not in any way. I wouldn't say that. Like if you figure it out, you know, somewhat before everybody else, that's okay. And people are going to figure things out at a different rate. You have somebody like me that can walk in and I figure things out almost immediately because I'm just a jerk like that. But but um, it doesn't have to be that unpredictable. No. The point is, though, if you think it's unpredictable and you're setting it up that way, that it should be. And there's a difference between that and kind of foreshadowing to the twist
Hmm.
to, well, this came from left field because the author barely gave me an insight kind of twist. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Is it a good idea to include positive feedback from a beta reader on your book's back cover? Um, Depends on what you mean by that. Like including things like reviews on a cover, especially as a newer author. Yeah, I mean that can help, you know, because it tells you something about it. I would say a lot of the time, if you're talking about the self-publishing world, that's not going to be so much on a cover as much as like part of your blurb, right? You might write a blurb and then you might have a couple quotes from different people. And obviously, people are going to be like, well, who's this random person? So is it going to carry a ton of weight? Maybe
Exactly.
not. But what it can tell you is just kind of what a reaction was. It could be helpful if it clues, for me, I find it helpful if it clues me into if I'm the audience for it, right? Because that's to
Hmm.
me what it's helpful for. So if it's a person that's like, you know, I loved this. It reminded me of the world building in Harry Potter or something. I don't know. Then it's like, okay, I get it. Okay, I know what kind of thing it is. You know,
Hmm.
feedback is really different than a review. Yeah, that's something to keep
Yes.
in mind.
Yeah.
And the other thing I will say too is that, you know, obviously that's kind of inside baseball, right? That's not like I sent my book to some random person I've never met in my life. This is somebody that's kind of doing you a favor. So in the context of putting it out there as something to talk about your book, it does have that context to it, which means that it's a little bit weird, you know, because it's
Yeah.
kind of
And
a different sort of thing.
I think the standard is to ask before you plug something as if it was an endorsement.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. I think that might be it for my slides. It is, but it's not it for us here on AutoCrit because next week we have an exciting new challenge for you. And I think we've either hinted or spelled it out that we're going to be doing this, but we are going to be doing Destination Unknown. And you can click down here and you can sign up. Now, this is a different sort of challenge than this month's challenge. This is just for you. So what we're going to be doing is we will be giving you a prompt. We will be giving you a twist. Yes, there is a plot twist, but it's for you as a writer. And we will be giving you an ending. And I think there's even another twist along the way. But we have different little surprises that come up because the point of this is to get you thinking outside your box. We want you to challenge yourself as a writer. So if you want to see this in action, you can actually go back and you can see what happened last year. Last year, the opening line was there was a fire in my feet and I couldn't stop moving. And people took that all different kinds of way. We had people that took it as a dancing, people took it as literal fire, people that took it as energy, you know. And that's what we want you to do. We want you to run with it, right? And we've had people go through Destination Unknown and then end up submitting their stuff to short story anthologies and things like that. At the end of Destination Unknown, we aren't going to actually be judging them. That's not the purpose of it is to get you excited. However, we definitely are going to be talking about it. You know, if you want to share it along the way on our live streams, what you're working on, get inspiration for others, get feedback on what you're doing. If you're in the AutoCrit community, we'll be doing some events within the AutoCrit community where we'll be giving some feedback and talking about brainstorming and things like that. And you will have an opportunity to get some feedback directly from us, from some of the editors here, if you want to submit it when you're done, because it's like, hey, you have this to work on, right? So yeah, we'll have that as well. But it's gonna be a lot of fun. I love Destination Unknown. Gareth takes some sadistic pleasure in coming up with the twists. So that'll be fun. Thank you so much, Catherine, for joining me this week to talk about plot twists. I had a lot of fun.
This was a blast. Thank you, everybody, for hopping on with us.
I know, right? So please like, subscribe, hit the bell if you have not. Sign up below, and you'll get emails with prompts and all the instructions for how to participate in the challenge. It is free to join. And yeah, we'll see you next week for Destination Unknown. It's really quite unknown. I don't
Yay.
even know where we're starting at. Gareth hasn't told me anything. So it's going to be a twist
See,
for me.
see,
I
that'll be
might
your
even
twist.
yeah, I might even like ride along with this one. Maybe I should try that. I don't know. That's like what you call it, doing trapeze or trapeze without a net, right? Can I write a story over live streams and reveal at the end? Maybe. If enough people like and
Ooh.
subscribe and tell me that I have to do it, I might just have to do it. So anyway, I'll see you all next week. See you around AutoCrit, everybody. Bye.
Bye.